Welcome to EDO Breakthrough, the podcast where we tackle economic development challenges head on. From small towns to bustling cities, every place has its own hurdles to overcome. The EDO Breakthrough podcast creates an environment of collaboration, innovation, and understanding where we can share our real-life challenges and brainstorm solutions. I'm your host, Sandy Dubé, a certified economic developer and founder of PPR Strategies. Each week, we'll be welcoming a different, brilliant, place-based mind to talk through real-life economic development challenges that have been shared with us by you, our gracious listeners. I am joined by a site selection consultant at Global Location Strategies, Nicholette Ross. Thanks for joining me today, Nicholette.
Thank you for having me.
As we kick things off, I would love for you to share a little bit about yourself with our listeners.
Absolutely. So, Nicholette Ross, again, it's an absolute pleasure to join today's podcast. So I'm originally from South Carolina, currently living in the Netherlands, which has been a very fun experience so far. But was raised up in South Carolina, went to undergrad at the University of South Carolina, spent some time in Miami, and now living the life in Netherlands.
That's awesome. So how did you get involved in economic development? How did that journey start?
Well, I think like most people in our field kind of found economic development by accident. I was working full time and doing something completely different, but within the sales field, and was really just looking for a way to transition because I went to school for international business and really wanted to do something that allowed me to work internationally. I really thought that I was going to be doing something within the trade field, or some people that know a little bit about my background. I had this dream of working at the UN. Obviously, that did not pan out, but for a good reason. And so, I was trying to find opportunities that were unrelated to what I was doing, but people just were not taking me very seriously. So I ended up actually finding Miami-Dade County's Economic Development and International Trade Office, thinking that I was going there to volunteer for the Sister Cities program. And they were just really phenomenal with allowing me to be a part of a lot of other discussions, which exposed me to more of the economic development side of things. And long story longer, I got some experience by working with them. I had a friend that was actually working at South Carolina Department of Commerce doing working projects. And he reached out to me and was like, "Oh, I saw that you were doing this now. Like, you should come back home." And of course, like most people that move away from home, I definitely didn't want to move back because I moved away for good reason, to like create this new life and all these things. And so at first I was not wanting to move back, but eventually, a position opened there. So I went back to the state, and probably the best decision that I could have made. So I certainly do not regret it, and got my background and everything by starting with the Department of Commerce in South Carolina.
That's amazing. For our listeners that are not familiar with Sister City, could you give them a little, quick snapshot on what that program was like? And that might help lead us into some of these other conversations.
Absolutely. So, on a high level, Sister Cities, different cities have a program where they make kind of a connection at a government level with another city that's typically international. And they do events that help them to exchange cultural learnings, business learnings, just to further either trade or business development across both cities. And different programs take shape in different forms, but essentially it's to help that collaboration a bit better.
That's awesome. And then when you were with the South Carolina Department of Commerce, you were still in that international space. So you were supporting businesses that wanted to export or attracting investment. Where were you finding most of your experience or activity?
Yeah, so I was a project manager for the state for 2 years, helping to attract investments into the state. Truly a rewarding experience. I think anytime you're able to represent the area where you're from, that's always really nice. And I mean, it was just really crazy because you have all of these businesses that seemingly are just popping up while you're growing up in an area. You don't really know why people are moving there or where the company is even coming from. And so it was cool to be a part of that process and see like, oh, Continental, this is how that happened. So that was really cool. And then I actually ended up going to the Europe office for the state as well, worked there for 2 years, helping to attract European companies specifically into the state of South Carolina.
That's awesome. And it's so funny. Part of the reason that I stayed after college in the community that I worked in and subsequently worked at economic development was because my hometown I felt was developing too fast and I wasn't a part of it and I wanted to be a part of that growth. So to your point of like understanding
Oh,
where and how these businesses were coming in, nobody's ever said that to me before. But you're 100% right. You think as a kid that this just kind of happens, and maybe as an adult you think that too, unless you understand what economic is and that
exactly.
there are actually people, government, and otherwise, public and private, that are working towards creating opportunities for people to live and work and invest in these communities.
Yeah, it is really cool because where I'm from Sumter, South Carolina. And growing up, it always felt like kind of a small town. We would go to Columbia in order to do like shopping at bigger malls and so what. And to see how Sumter has developed since I lived there as a child has been just wild to see. And all because of like economic development and that collaboration with community development. So it is cool to be a part of the process.
It's awesome. So how do you make that transition from a state Department of Commerce doing economic development to the other side as a site selection consultant, doing economic development just through in a different role? What did that transition look like for you?
So I did not plan, I guess, to make the transition, but when I was in Munich, I was moving back to the US, and my then boss was very nice to make some introductions to people in different areas of site selection as well as economic development because I knew that I wanted to stay within this space. And so I met with a couple of people, and one of those people just happened to be Dee Dee Caldwell, who is our CEO and founder for Global Location Strategies. And yeah, and after that discussion with her, the rest is kind of history, and that's how I ultimately made the transition into the site selection world. But having that economic development background, I feel has been very helpful with like the learning curve because there's certainly some differences between the two roles. But you have a better understanding of, what the process is essentially, and learning kind of the alphabet soup of the world that has to do with our industry was a lot easier because I already knew all of the different components that ultimately play a role into getting a company to come to the area. So I am super thankful for having that economic development background because I think it led to an easier, I guess, transition and understanding kind of the ins and outs of what would be needed for site selection, though there are certainly some other things that I've learned now being on the other side, but I think it helped in the beginning with that learning curve.
Yeah, well, and things transitioning. So you were moved from South Carolina to Germany, continued to work for South Carolina. Then did you come back to the States to work for Global Location Strategies?
Yes. So I moved to Charlotte, North Carolina, from Munich, Germany, and then moved from Charlotte to Amsterdam in the Netherlands.
And how did you pick Amsterdam, or was it picked for you?
We went through a site selection process. Okay. So we went through our own process to narrow down to Amsterdam, and ultimately, due to the connectivity of the area, we have different partners. We work with investment promotion agencies as well, which are the equivalent of economic development organizations here in the US. And they're concentrated kind of in the area as a whole. And getting a business up and running also was, I don't want to say easy, but easier in terms of getting things started here. So it it worked out as kind of the top location. And of course, there's some factors from a quality of life standpoint that were included in there as well. So I think ultimately it was a great decision for us.
That's awesome. And which is, you're right. I mean, that is site selection, is that you look at it from a business perspective, but you also need to look at it from a human perspective on the team that you are able to either recruit to live there and work and run that organization, or, how are you going to be able to, recruit local talent to help start up your business? What does that look like, from a cultural perspective? All of those different things. Yeah, you were kind of living it. And I told you when we talked before, I love Amsterdam. I just thought it was just, I mean, two of my favorite things, like a downtown, cute hub and water. And you got both. So,
It is a nice city. I cannot complain whatsoever. I know some people have qualms about the weather here, but I think, I mean, you just ride your bike and everything is so picturesque and just gorgeous. And it is a small town. It's way smaller than I think you kind of realize coming in, but it's jam packed with stuff. Like it's small, but mighty for sure.
yeah, I did not do the bike. We were there for a week. It was for my 50th birthday a year and a half ago, and
Oh.
it was a surprise trip. It was so much fun, but I did not have the nerve to get on a bike. I just wanted to stay out of the way of the bicyclists. It was too much.
Well, that's funny because it's actually the opposite. You want to be on the bike to stay out of the way.
And probably I that's what I should have done, was just like leaned in on it. But oh my gosh, yeah, it was too much. I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. But I'm curious what that, we've got listeners that are in economic development, have been doing this for a little while. And you talked about, kind of shifting perspectives of, having that background in economic development, and now again, being that connector for your businesses, for your clients that are thinking about these things, and helping to be an advocate for your client, but also support and I guess maybe translate for the economic developers what they need to know or to do or not do. I'm curious what that, either your day to day looks like, or maybe some lessons that you've learned over the last couple of years in this role.
Yeah, my day to day, I think looks different.
Hmm. Hmm.
Depending on the project, where we're at in a project and so forth. But, typically I am working alongside the rest of our team to help provide support to our clients. We're always on our side interacting with the economic development organizations, whether that be at the state, regional, or local level on our side. So I do also in my role participate in those types of collaborations as well. And something for us that I think is very important in making sure a project is successful in an area is having that collaboration with the economic development organizations. But, really on a day to day, I would say there's a lot of communicating going on, whether that be behind the scenes or, you know, interacting again with the economic development organizations or those that are part of the process. So really any stakeholders that would be involved ultimately in what that final location would involve. And a lot of collaboration internally on our side as well. I feel like even though I'm literally an ocean apart from our team, we frequently collaborate. I feel as if I am still in the office sometimes with them. And for us, there's even like this joke because normally I'm not a morning person. I would prefer to work in the afternoon or in the evening. So when I moved to Amsterdam, we always make this joke that now I'm finally on the same time zone as the rest of my team, because I swear everyone else, they are all morning people and get up super early. So it's like, it's perfect. And it
They
works.
can do their 7, 8 o'clock and you're knocking in at noon. It sounds great.
It is perfect. It is truly perfect.
Uh, I love it. Yeah, my partner, my boyfriend and I have purchased a flat in London, or
Oh,
actually
yes.
Bath, so in England. And so trying to figure out like, what that looks like, doing work there, I'm trying to connect with the investment, the economic development, the tourism community in that area, to think about it from a, marketing support, strategic planning, storytelling,
Mhm.
capacity and in these things. So I'm very much in that mindset at the moment, and trying to understand how things are happening in the UK and then in Europe in general. So this Amsterdam, Netherlands, location for you, I find interesting. Do you do work? Are you like throughout Europe? Do you have other colleagues that are in other locations throughout Europe? How does that? Are you supporting? Kind of who are you supporting? How do you finding your clients? I'm just curious.
Yeah, yeah. So our office, really, we're supporting anyone coming into Europe. So we do site selection within in Europe and also any neighboring markets as well. And then we also support with any European clients going into other markets. So we're doing kind of both ways. And so we do cover all of Europe. We also do work in the Middle East or North Africa. So we have a wide geography that we are looking at, and really it's kind of a team effort. So I'm physically here, and it's a lot easier for me to go in person, of course, to visit with our clients, or to go, you know, have those connections with different investment promotion agencies. So that is a part, I guess I should have said, in my day to day, I am collaborating, with some of the investment promotion agencies on this side as well, just to maintain those relationships, and also to get a good, working relationship. So when we do have some projects in those areas, it just makes things a lot easier. Same as, building those relationships on the US side as well. So even though I'm here, we still have support from other markets. I mean, we have people throughout North America. We do have another colleague here in the Netherlands, and have a presence also within Latin America. So we all kind of pull together for whichever geography ultimately we're looking at for our clients.
Cool. I love it. And, thinking about that, and I keep going back to, but I don't want to necessarily with like your own site selection process. But what, a client comes to you and says, "Hey, we want to expand. We think that we want to expand into, somewhere in Europe. We don't know where." How do you help them to craft kind of that location strategy and approach, figuring out what to do first?
If they do not have an idea of where they want to go, we do provide support there in narrowing down the search region. And our first primary step is really to get an understanding of what's driving the project, what's going to be a critical location driver when it comes to the actual facility as well, and just really understanding their operations as well as their long-term goals. So that's kind of our first step. And then from there, once we have a good idea of what that looks like for them, we can start to evaluate and analyze different areas that may be most optimal based on what's their critical location drivers, their long-term needs, ultimately to get them to different areas that are going to help them be successful for generations. So once that's kind of defined, then we go from there.
Interesting. It's like really solving any problem. Like, let's figure out, why you think it's a problem, what it is that you're working towards, and how would you measure success at the end of the day? And is it, a short-term fix, I need a pen that works, or a long-term strategy, I want to manufacture pens so that I never go without one that isn't working. So, those of us that are listening, yes, I just pick up pens. I pick up random things on my desk, whatever is in my line of sight. That tends to be my prop.
No, but that's right. I mean, and every project truly is a little bit different from one another. So, there's not necessarily a copy and paste. There's some things, of course, that may happen across all projects or main things that you're looking at, but the way you look at them or the degree of importance for that particular factor will vary across projects. So we kind of tailor that once we have a good understanding of, for them specifically, what's going to be those drivers and rules of success.
We're not doing Mad Libs for economic development over here. We're not just filling in the blanks with some creative words. We're like really trying to get to the heart and make it unique for that particular client project, whatever it happens to be. So interesting.
Exactly.
What I'm curious in terms of some of the things that you are evaluating, and maybe this is, we can, talk about your example, or if you've got a recent project, obviously not disclosing anything that's confidential, but what, some of your in-person visits, some of the data, some of the things that, like, just doing a gut check, how are you evaluating all of these different elements during a site visit, or looking at things strictly online and see what's out there?
In terms of what we're evaluating, again, that is going to vary a bit by project. Typically we are looking at, the site characteristics, we're looking at the utilities, we're looking at the workforce. But what is included under those kind of larger buckets, that really does kind of change with each project. But we do both desktop evaluations and then also do in-person evaluations as well. So there is kind of that combined effort. I would say typically earlier in the process, it is going to be more of that desktop level until you get a more shorter list of locations. And then typically that is when you're going in person. Of course, that can change based on the project dynamics, but oftentimes we see ourselves going to visit in person once it's more of that shorter list of locations.
Yeah, I mean, just thinking about kind of some of the stuff, the data that doesn't show up, in a desktop research, but you get there maybe and you're like, oh my gosh, I had no idea. I mean, just the value of both, I guess is the point. But a community has to get through the data piece of the requirements first, and they have to have been able to, tell their story online, the data, in different ways before you're going to invest in a visit to a community.
Yeah, I mean, it is a very data-driven process, but to your point, there is naturally a human element that does come into play. Things, for instance, that you don't necessarily get in a data pool would be, one, we do employer interviews. That typically is not something that's going to be broadcasted for public use, of course, and we do those confidentially, so employers feel comfortable disclosing different information. And honestly, that's one of my favorite parts, because not only do you get an understanding of the workforce side of things, but you also understand what is it really that's going on within the community. Are they good partners? Are you using the tech college? All of these different facets that you can't find just in data alone. And then also just getting the feels of it. So, company representatives do also go in person for these visits. And ultimately, you want to have and find a good partner. So, yes, on paper, it's like hiring anybody. On paper, it might be a good fit. But once you bring that person in for an interview, you may find that there's not those synergies there that make you feel comfortable that these are people that are going to be there if something, hits the fan. So, certainly there's the technical aspects of everything and making sure that truly works for the project and its requirements. But there is that human side of things that I don't personally think can be replaced with, solely doing everything on the computer and virtually. I think some things you just have to be there in person to really get a good feel for them.
Yeah, I love the comparison to the interview process, where we're like looking at people on paper to evaluate, to narrow down the focus. But hiring's a big deal. Expanding your business is a big deal. And, so you want to be making those decisions right the first time, be really intentional about it. But I also love the employer interviews. And, we talk a lot about how you really business retention and your existing business support is the first step in business attraction. Like if you don't know what all of those businesses are going to say, and have a handle on that level of detail, you are setting yourself up for failure, unfortunately, because they're going to be the first ones to, meet with you or your counterparts, your colleagues, to say, I don't even know who the economic developer is in my community. I've been having issues. And so I just happen to, go over their head, and I'm good friends with the mayor. And so blah, 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 whatever it is, like that's the opposite of what you would ever want. And so thinking about what that, being intentional and taking the time to invest in your existing businesses, I think because if you don't have time for your existing, how are you going to have time for more businesses to come in and support your community?
Yeah, exactly.
So I'm curious, in terms of trends, what are you seeing? Anything new, different? I don't even know if I want to say tariffs. So it is we are recording this in 2025. Oh, geesh. So we don't have to go there. You can go there if you want, but I'm just curious if you're seeing any trends in site selection these days.
Yeah, I think obviously tariffs are a big question. I don't know yet that anyone has the right answer for how to navigate the changing climate. I think companies are certainly considering how it impacts their operations. But we're still seeing good activity, and I think that's very positive. I think in terms of the tariffs, most entities that already had plans in motion or thinking through plans, the tariffs may impact their overall strategy, but we have not seen anyone that has just completely decided, okay, because of these tariffs, let's go.
Okay.
Yeah, for us, we've kind of seen that if it was already in motion or being thought about, then this may add an additional trigger, but may not be the sole reason as to why companies are moving. And I saw that a bit too during Select USA. So just recently had that show and got some of that different feedback from companies as well. Other trends, though, definitely electric is top of mind for many people. I mean, the landscape does not seem positive these days in terms of just overall generation capacity and infrastructure that needs to be built out. So that is something that we're having to navigate from a site selection perspective, especially for some of these larger demand types of projects. They're just a lot bigger than what they have been historically. And so just figuring out what regions, what states, what communities are able to accommodate these types of projects is certainly something that has been having an impact on ultimately what areas you can even look at. And then also another thing that I've been seeing is the community piece. So I think there's always considerations around, will the community be accepting of the type of project? But I think just due to the nature of all of the activity and impacts that a lot of projects have had, you kind of have to look at the community piece even earlier in the process to make sure there's not going to be any hurdles, especially if there's any approval processes that are required where there's, public input. You really want to make sure that before you even start to spin the wheels in an area, that it's going to be one where there's an alignment essentially on what is being recruited from an attraction standpoint versus what those community stakeholders actually want in their backyard. So I've been trying to navigate that a bit more earlier in the process just to make sure there's no hurdles there.
A great reminder. I mean, we think about the regulatory issues and challenges, and to know that, any of those additional obstacles, additional layers that are happening at a, city, county, state perspective are all going to impact future projects. So interesting. What advice do you have for economic developers that want to make their communities more competitive for future projects?
My advice would be to know the site in and out, and not just the strengths, but also the weaknesses, and own the weaknesses, not in the sense of being proud of what the weakness is, so to speak, but understanding where the gaps are and having solutions to fill the gaps. Because, there's not a perfect site. There's always going to be some degree of trade-off that a company is going to have to make. And it's understandable that maybe, utility infrastructure, for instance, is not in place straight away, but understanding, what those timelines will be, or having solutions for alternate ideas just to help bridge the gap. I think that is almost critical, and making sure that you can paint a full picture of the site, and also anything in the community as well. I think that would be my biggest piece of advice.
Well, yeah, like have a really solid base on reality, and not this aspirational. You need to know where you are today and not try to sugarcoat it all,
Yeah,
all the
but
time. Yeah.
also, knowing where you can be in the future, though, because that's okay that it's not there today, but it's difficult to really understand and answer question marks if there hasn't been any other due diligence done.
Oh, okay.
You know what I mean? So
Mhm.
like, if you say like, no, we don't have the water, and you end a period there,
Okay.
there's not
Yeah.
much we can do. But if there's no, we don't have the water, but here's how we're going to get it. That's kind of the information that's really helpful to have in order to build a case on the site in that area.
That's great. I'm curious if you've had some of those experiences, like if you've missed an opportunity because, or maybe common pitfalls or something, in there where economic development maybe ended the sentence with "we don't have water," period, instead of, or if there were other things that they're doing that they should stop.
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest ones, particularly during the RFI process, not completely filling out the RFI, or just leaving room for question, or highlighting risk for the site. Because at the end of the day, we're really trying to make sure we identify a property that's going to have the lowest risk associated when it comes to some of those gaps specifically. And so the more that we can answer the questions around the site, the better it is to fully characterize it. So, I've seen on RFIs where some folks will put in a response of, we'll provide it if we advance, but it's very hard to advance if there's no kind of argument for that location, if there's no information provided. So I would say that's one of the biggest things I see quite early on in the process.
That's great advice. fill out the documents, answer all the questions. Okay. Seems basic, but you're right. I mean, and I've been on that side of things where we're like, oh my gosh, this is such a massive amount of work. What is our chance of getting this? Oh my gosh. I hate to, you know, show all the warts. I just want to show the pretty stuff. I don't want to, come to this realization or, you know, that we're not perfect. But as you said earlier, there's no truly perfect site out there. We'll just, what can we do to make it right for this project?
Yeah.
Interesting. Anything else that you'd like to share, Nicholette? Were you like, oh my gosh, I hope that Sandy asks me about such and such because I'm dying to talk about this thing. Anything else you'd like to share today before I ask my final question?
Anything you want me to share?
No. It wasn't loaded. It wasn't like, oh my gosh. I hope that you recruit me to, come and work with you in Amsterdam. It wasn't like that. But
we'll be hiring. Don't worry. I'll send out the notice.
Oh my goodness. So my final question for all of our guests is, as the name dictates, we are the EDO Breakthrough podcast. So I'd love to hear, what was your economic development breakthrough?
I would say my breakthrough was definitely when I was working with commerce, because I was telling the story earlier about just understanding how different companies came to be within the state and playing a role in knowing that you're helping to create quality jobs in an area and bring investment to different communities. I mean, for me, there's nothing that can really replace that feeling. And I remember someone asked me like, oh, if you weren't doing, economic development, then what other job would you have? I don't think I would have another job. I think I would just find another job within the same space. You know what I mean? Because I really think what we do it has a positive impact on wherever we're working. And so I would definitely say kind of my breakthrough was while I was at Commerce, that I realized this is definitely something that I want to do for a lifetime. I really cannot imagine doing anything else.
That's great. I love it. I love it. Love it. You're right. It changes the lens, like the lens that we look at when we're traveling for work or for pleasure, or, thinking about communities from main streets to, connectivity at airports, to, how Uber drivers are telling a story of their community and if they love it there or if they're miserable. And we've all had those experiences, and, it's all part of that ecosystem.
It's so cool to drive by a company and be like, oh, I worked on that project.
Aww.
I mean, it's so cool. I'm telling you, it's just, it's a crazy feeling to just be a part of the process. Just, it's amazing to me. And that's why I also like being on this side as well, because even for us, I'm not working anymore for a specific state or community, but for us, it's really important that the location makes sense for both sides. So not just the company, but also the community. So I feel like I'm still being able to find a true kind of partnership. So both are mutually propelling, with success into the future. The community based on the investment, then of course the company, so that they're able to continue their progression for their business. So it's a great feeling.
And I'm sure our listeners have that feeling, and sometimes we just need to be reminded of it and, see the wins and see the difference that we're making in our communities. And I know the PPR team, we love, helping and supporting communities and helping the individuals, the economic developers that are doing this day to day, and take some of the work that can't get done by economic developers on a day to day to we can, fill in gaps and help with some of that capacity growth, which we just absolutely love. Anyway, thank you, Nicholette. I know we could sit here and talk forever, but I really appreciate your time today. Until next time.
The EDO Breakthrough podcast is brought to you by PPR Strategies. PPR Strategies, standing for People and Places Reimagined, is a strategic consulting firm working specifically with EDOs and other place-based organizations. We share the unique stories of communities through communication, strategic planning, marketing, media relations, and more. Visit us at pprstrategies.com and find our contact information in the show notes. I'd like to give a big thank you to you for listening. Remember, together we are unstoppable.